So we are here with Devin Ershow, the owner and founder of American Mash and Grain, and I have the privilege of being able to ask him a couple questions about his distilling, his blending, his storytelling journey. So I guess first up, Devin, are you a whiskey storyteller, a blender, a master distiller, or something entirely different? What exactly is American Mash and Grain?
Well, I'm definitely not a master distiller, that's for sure. I think first and foremost, we're storytellers at American Mash and Grain. We like to say whiskey's about stories, and we want to tell them. We operate a website, mashandgrain.com. On that website, we feature a different craft whiskey producer from around the country every month. We focus on that one distillery, give it our full attention for a whole month. We write these long form articles that deep dive into everything you would want to know about them, who they are, where they're from, why they decided to get into this business, how they do what they do, how they market what they do. So we really try to tell holistic stories about these producers. And then with the whiskeys that we produce, that we put out, Borrowed Page, we work with those same distilleries that we featured on our website and try to blend different styles of whiskey from different distilleries together to try to create something truly unique and distinctive that's unlike anything else you'll find on the market, but also serves to share those stories of the producers that we chose to partner with. Whether it's the written form or content that we have on the website or the liquid that we put into our bottles, I like to think that we're storytellers.
I love how the name Borrowed Page kind of goes right into the whole storytelling aspect of what you do. It's, you clearly have a true passion for your craft, and that definitely shines through. What exactly inspired you to start American Mash and Grain, and how did your personal journey with whiskey lead to its creation?
So I started getting into whiskey around 2017. My wife and I went on a trip to Ireland. We had a tour at Trinity College, showed up a little bit early, saw that the Irish Whiskey Museum was right across the street, decided to pop in, and they happened to have a tour starting in a couple minutes, so we hopped on. And that tour really changed my life. I fell in love with the history, the process. I spent the rest of that trip drinking as much Irish whiskey as I could get my hands on. When I came back to the United States, I wanted to learn all about all different kinds of whiskeys. What was different between the Irish whiskey I just learned about and bourbon, Scotch, Japanese whiskey. So I started tumbling down the rabbit hole, got a few certifications under my belt, started studying a little bit more, drinking a lot more, different styles. And at the time I was working in the film and television industry in New York, and whiskey was sort of my passion, it was my hobby. I started getting a few part-time jobs. I worked as a brand ambassador in New York City for Wiggle Whiskey, which is based out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I became a tour guide at Kings County Distillery in Brooklyn, New York. And then the pandemic happened and everything sort of shut down. And I remember speaking to my best friend, Chase, about how discouraged I was because I felt like I was starting to make some inroads in the spirits industry. I was interested in maybe making a career change, but then this pandemic happened and everything kind of halted. And it was actually his idea. He said, why don't we start a blog? We can hop on Zoom and we can interview distillers. His background was in brand storytelling and marketing. I had learned a lot at that point about whiskey history and the process. So he thought if we could combine our two specialties, we could really tell these holistic stories, like I mentioned before. We started the website, and the rest is sort of history from there so far.
So you mentioned having a handful of whiskey certifications. You have a black belt in whiskey. I didn't know this was even offered. Can you tell us just briefly what whiskey certifications you have and how did you get those?
Oh, sure. So I am an executive bourbon steward through the Stave and Thief Society out of Kentucky. It's a part of Moonshine University, which is a funny name, but it is one of the only places in the United States where you can really learn how to make whiskey. But Stave and Thief is just really a certification in bourbon expertise. It's the only accredited bourbon certificate that is recognized by the Kentucky Distillers Association. My wife had bought me a book to study and become a certified bourbon steward, and then they ended up offering their first ever executive bourbon steward class, which is something you have to attend in person, and you've got to pass sensory evaluations and written tests and all that stuff. They offered their first ever class outside of Kentucky at Kings County Distillery in Brooklyn, which at the time I was just a fan of. But I signed up, I took the course, I ended up meeting who would become my future bosses at Kings County Distillery at that course. So it really helped me get a foot in the door. And then while I was at Kings County Distillery, they actually paid for me to get my level 2 award certificate in spirits from the WSET, the Wine and Spirits Education Trust, which is based out in the UK. And since then, I've also become a certified bourbon professional by the Council of Whiskey Masters. And I am currently studying to become a course provider for the Edinburgh Whiskey Academy.
Well, if my wife is watching this, she's getting very angry at you because you just listed a whole bunch of things I'm probably going to go now do.
Yeah, it's not cheap, unfortunately.
That's okay. It will be a fun journey. Your platform, it emphasizes storytelling and whiskey. How do you go about selecting the distilleries and the narratives you feature?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, we only work with distilleries that we've featured on the website in terms of the whiskey. We only feature craft producers on our website. Perhaps a handful of our distillery features might argue whether they're craft or not. But we're certainly, we felt when we started the company and started the website that Kentucky bourbon and the big industrial legacy brands that are out there, they have enough marketing budget to tell their own story. And they do a pretty damn good job of telling their story the way that they want to tell it. So we thought, who needs a little bit of help telling their story? Who's out there doing incredibly cool things that maybe you've never heard of before because they're out in Montana or Minnesota or Utah or California even. So we exclusively feature smaller craft producers, exclusively feature producers that make whiskey, as that is our passion and our focus. And those features come about in a number of ways. More often than not, I will have somebody tell me about a distillery that they visited or that they just tasted that was excellent, and they tell me, hey, you should reach out to these folks. Or every once in a while, a distillery will reach out to us and ask if we could feature them on the website. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, depends on what they're doing. But in general, we try to do a little bit of research into who they are and what they're doing. And if we feel like they are doing something that really adds to the next chapter of what we see American whiskey being and becoming, because we want to help tell those stories. And then for the borrowed page whiskeys, we only work with distilleries that we've already featured, people that we have met and made relationships with, people who we know how and why they do what they do, and we believe in it. And we want it to be a part of what we're trying to do for that next chapter in American whiskey.
You feature small craft distilleries. Do all of the distilleries that you feature and blend with Borrowed Page distill their own spirits, or do any of them use sourced bourbons or whiskeys from anywhere else?
It's a great question. The answer is kind of both to an extent. We don't feature anybody who exclusively sources their whiskey. We have featured plenty of places that started off with a sourced product and then simultaneously were laying down their own distillate and now are either in the process of sort of merging the two, or they've moved entirely into products that they exclusively make themselves. It's no knock against MGP or people who white label with MGP, but we're not interested in doing a 7-page feature about someone who bought some 95.5 barrels and put their label on it. As wonderful as they may be, it's just not the story that we're interested in.
For those of us that don't know, can you define what white labeling with MGP means?
Sure. So MGP is one of the largest distilleries in the country. I think they are trying to rebrand and change their name to something else, but we all know them as Midwest grain producers. But they have an incredible stock of whiskey. So in the last several decades, you've seen a number of new whiskeys hit the market, brand new labels, some being very transparent, some maybe being a little less transparent. But ultimately, what a lot of people do, because it is incredibly cost effective, much more cost effective than what we're trying to do, is they will buy stock from MGP, aged whiskey, and then they will blend it and bottle it and put their label on it. That's what white labeling is. So they didn't distill the product, they didn't have any input in how it was distilled or why it was distilled, but they're buying bulk barrels from a big producer like MGP so that they can get a relatively low overhead whiskey out the door under a brand new label.
So to dive a little further into Borrowed Page,
Sure.
In front of you, you have Volume 1 and Volume 2. These are your two releases so far.
Yeah.
From my understanding, these are fairly interesting unicorns you have here. They sold out almost immediately, and there's only a very limited number of each. Can you tell us a little bit more about what kind of goes into them?
Yeah, absolutely. Volume 1 is completely sold out. Volume 2 is still available, both here in retail stores in Colorado and online in our shop if you are interested. What goes into each of them? Well, the concept behind Borrowed Page was Chase and I did not want to just white label another bourbon or another rye. We first and foremost knew that we wanted to exclusively work with small producers, but we also didn't want to just put out another whiskey that would maybe just get lost in the noise. So it was actually when it was a few years ago back, which is funny to think about because American Single Malt just got designated in 2025. But back in 2021, or maybe early 22, I remember seeing a post from Matt Hoffman at Westland Distillery, kind of alluding that American Single Malt was about to get standardized. Little did he know it would take another 4 years to get there. But that's sort of when the light bulb went off for me. If American Single Malt is about to get standardized, then American whiskey, which is sort of a catch-all term for the government, that is really any American-made whiskey that doesn't fall within one of their standards. Their standards being like bourbon, rye, wheat, now single malt, now that it's been designated. American whiskey was sort of the last bastion of unbridled innovation and experimentation in the American whiskey realm. It had the most latitude for you to sort of play around and try to create, in my view, flavor profiles, aroma profiles that were differentiated from everything else that was available in the market. So I reached out to Chase. I said, American whiskey, that's our thing. So once we had that in mind, again, the small producer thing was already there. So we decided we were going to blend multiple styles of whiskey, bourbons and ryes and malts and wheats, etc., from multiple distilleries to try to create products that, in my mind, have kind of three objectives. The first is to push back against the taboo that we have in this country around the word blended. Blended whiskeys are very popular in Europe, especially Scotland and Ireland, but they have come to sort of have a connotation here in the United States as meaning a cheaply made product, right? Mostly because a lot of American blended whiskeys in the 70s and 80s were kind of young whiskeys that were blended with neutral grain spirit, basically vodka, to put out something light, very low in flavor, and something very cheap, right? We're talking the bottom shelf of the liquor store. So the first objective is to create American blended whiskeys that are big and bold and flavorful and extremely high quality to push against that connotation that American blended whiskey means a cheap or poorly made product. These are incredibly high quality whiskeys. The second is to try to create something that has a flavor profile that isn't like anything else that you're going to find out on the market. The first release, Volume 1, has 2 bourbons in it from 2 different distilleries, Watershed Distillery in Columbus, Ohio, Spirits of French Lick in West Baden, Indiana. It has a Monongahela rye whiskey, which is a rye whiskey with no corn in it. So it's a rye, wheat, barley mash bill out of Wiggle. which was a nice little nod as Wiggle gave me my first real job in the industry. So it was really wonderful to get to give back and to work with them for that. And then the real curveball in Volume 1 is a mesquite smoked single malt from Whiskey Del Bac in Tucson, Arizona. I don't think there's any other whiskey on the market that's going to give you two different kinds of bourbon, one column distilled, one pot distilled. One of them has oats in the mash bill, a Monongahela rye, and a mesquite smoked single malt. So the whiskey in the bottle is truly unlike anything else on the market. And the third objective is that we wanted to use it as an opportunity to do exactly what we do with the website, which is to shine a light back on the small producers that we partnered with, expose more people to their product and to their story, and to hopefully have it be a part of our overall mission of elevating the American craft whiskey movement and what these small producers are doing out there. So in full transparency, on the front of all of our borrowed page bottles, there is a bottom band that has the logos of the distilleries that we worked with for that specific release. So that's how we sort of put them together. If you want to find our whiskeys, you can find them on our website, which is grain.com. So mashandgrain.com.
Do you ship to all 50 states?
We do not ship to all 50 states. We ship to, I believe, 47 states, which is every state with the exception of Alaska, Hawaii, and Utah.
So you keep mentioning that you blend different whiskeys from all around the U.S. and craft distilleries. Do you distill anything? And if you don't, then why just blend?
No, we do not. Is the short version of that answer. I have worked as a distiller. When I was at Kings County Distillery, they started to teach me how to distill. I did a few experimental projects with them. I worked as a distiller here in Denver at Denver Distillery, but we do not distill for American Mash and Grain, at least not right now. And the reason being is that first and foremost, it's incredibly expensive to distill. Opening a distillery, as we've learned through 5 years of interviewing entrepreneurs on our website, is an incredibly capital intensive and stressful experience to do. We wanted to be able to get something out onto the market also a little bit faster. When you distill whiskey, you've got to lay it down, you've got to put it into a barrel, got to let it sit in that barrel for at least a few years. So in order to get something out on the market that we were excited to put out there, buying already aged product from small producers around the country and then creating these unique blends was not only something that was intriguing from both an artistic and a creative standpoint, but it also allowed for us to get something out on the market much faster than we would have if we had decided to either distill ourselves or contract distill through somebody else.
Can you tell us a little bit about the selection and blending process? Is it you hanging out with some friends and experimenting with different casks? How exactly does this work? Is it a scientific or formula-driven approach?
Scientific, yes. And one of my favorite things about whiskey is that, in my mind, it is the perfect marriage of art and science. I went to liberal arts school. I grew up in a family of artists. So from a creative standpoint, art has always been a really big part of my life. If you go back and look at my grades, I was maybe not the greatest science student that has ever lived, but I'm certainly learning a lot more since I've been in the industry. The way that we go about selecting is, first and foremost, Chase and I have spent years interviewing people for the website. So we've got a pretty good knowledge and a relatively good database now that we've built on the website of incredible small producers around the country. Usually what happens is Chase and I kind of start tossing around some names of distilleries that we'd like to work with. We kind of start thinking about the borrowed page releases on a conceptual level. For example, Volume 1 being the first whiskey that we came out with, doing something that really nobody else was doing at the time, and really not something that no one had really done in America at that point, at least not the way that we were going about it. Volume 1 was a proof of concept that we could blend multiple styles of whiskey from multiple producers and create something distinctive and special out of it. So Volume 1 was really just proof of concept. So we thought, who are distilleries that we love, who is going to be on board with this really weird, wacky mission. Also, who's going to trust us with no blending experience whatsoever. One of the first people we got on board for Volume 1 was Spirits of French Lick in West Baden, Indiana. That's because at the time, their head distiller was a guy named Alan Bishop. And in my opinion, I think Alan is one of the most brilliant distilling minds in the country, possibly in the world. And we just had a feeling that he was going to be on board with this idea. And we were right. He was incredibly enthusiastic about it. Watershed came on board actually in a really interesting way. At the time, I actually misspoke. Watershed was really the first distillery on. We went to Allen right afterwards, but Watershed was the first distillery on because Greg Lehman, who founded Watershed Distillery, came to do a private tour at Kings County Distillery, where at the time I was working as the head of the tour and tasting program. I gave him a private tour. We had recently featured Watershed on the website, so he was familiar with me. After the tour ended, he asked me casually, so what's going on with American Mash and Grain? You guys have anything in the pipeline that you're excited about? And Chase and I had been talking about putting a whiskey out, but we had not put anything down in stone. So I don't know where I got the guts to just kind of spill this idea out to Greg Lehman, but we told him about it. And Greg is a very kind and overly humble guy. He kind of scratched his head and was like, wow, that sounds really cool. I don't know if you would ever consider us for something like that, but if you would, we'd be really interested in being a part of it. Meanwhile, my heart is beating out of my chest. I'm talking with a distiller. They like the idea of what we were thinking about doing. He wanted to be a part of it. So I called Chase immediately and I was like, hey, I know this is kind of ahead of our timeline, but I just had this conversation with Greg from Watershed. I think we kind of have to move on this idea now. So Watershed was the first kind of piece of the puzzle. We got Alan in right after that. I reached out to Wiggle because I worked with them. And then Whiskey Del Bach was our second ever feature on American Mash and Grain. And we just knew that mesquite smoked single malt was going to be the kind of secret curveball that was going to make Borrowed Page Volume 1 so special and prove this concept that we were thinking about doing, blending these multiple styles to create something special. So that's how Volume 1 came together. When we were conceptualizing Volume 2, because Volume 1 has a decent amount of bourbon in it, Chase and I laid out one rule and one rule only for Volume 2, and that was no bourbon. No bourbon allowed in Volume 2. Because we sort of saw Volume 2 as an extension of this proof of concept that each release of Borrowed Page is going to be different from the last. They're extremely small batch whiskeys, and once they're gone, they're gone. We're never going to recreate these releases. So that was the basis of Volume 2, and we just went on to thinking, well, who are some distilleries out there that we've spoken with that can kind of work within that framework, and the rest of Volume 2 sort of fell into place from there. So we only work with the producers that we featured on the website, and then usually Chase and I develop some sort of conceptual idea for a release and then start thinking about who would be a part of it. And we've been lucky that so far, for some reason, we've only been turned down twice. So far, we've had a pretty good track record of people wanting to be a part of it.
So while we're talking about conceptualizing releases, can we discuss any upcoming projects or collaborations American Mash and Grain is working on or you're excited about?
Yeah, we've been in the works on Volume 3 for a little while now. I can't tell you exactly what it is because we're really, really excited about this one. So once it comes together, we kind of want it to be a nice surprise for the consumer. But I will say this. I mentioned that we've only been turned down twice. For Volume 3, one of the distillers that has already committed to being a part of it was a distiller that told us no for Volume 1. So we've already converted in our first 2 releases a no to a yes, and we're really excited about having them involved.
Are we allowed to have a sneak peek at the flavor note you're going for? So Volume 1's heavy bourbon, Volume 2 is a little bit more malt. Are we allowed to see into the future what we're leaning towards, or is that something yet to be seen?
Something yet to be seen.
So you talked a lot about blending whiskeys. Will American Mash and Grain ever put out its own bourbon?
No. And this goes all the way back to when Chase and I were thinking about what kind of product we wanted to put out in the first place. I have no interest in producing just another bourbon. That's going to be on a long list of bourbons that are already out there and bourbons that are going to come online in the next 5 years. Nothing against bourbon. I am a bourbon lover. I love bourbon. I drink bourbon. But there's a couple reasons for that. The first is that, in my opinion, and this might be an unpopular one, but I believe that bourbon is being overproduced in this country at the moment. All of the big industrial giants have increased their production substantially. You know, you've got places like Buffalo Trace and Heaven Hill who are putting 14, 16, 1,800 barrels of bourbon away every single day. You've got a craft distillery now in every single state in the country making bourbon. In 2010, I believe there were about 195 distilleries in this country. And that includes distilleries that were making, you know, industrial grade, commercial grade ethanol for jets and stuff like that. At most recent count here in 2025, I believe there are over 3,000 distilleries operating in the United States. So we've gone from under 200 15 years ago to over 3,000 now. Bourbon is the spirit, the whiskey of this country, for sure. It was designated as a distinctive product of the United States in 1964. For over 50 years, bourbon has basically become synonymous with the word American whiskey. I think that what we are trying to do at American Mash and Grain is show people that American whiskey is and can be so much more than just bourbon. And for that reason, we're planting our flag in that American whiskey sort of vagueness. We're hoping to eventually at some point expand Borrowed Page into something that comes out, you know, quarterly, so that people can look forward to these new releases on a more regular basis. After that, we're really hoping to expand into some new SKUs, maybe even some whiskeys that have a little bit more of a consistent flavor profile than the Borrowed Page, so that people who like what we do can have something that they can sort of, you know, bring to the bank every time they pick up a bottle. But we believe that within that American whiskey category, we have the latitude to sort of play through blending and create a whiskey that isn't a bourbon, but appeals to a bourbon drinker, isn't a rye, but appeals to a rye drinker. And that's what we want to do, both with the Borrowed Page whiskeys and hopefully with whatever we might come out with in the future.
Do you have a tentative release date for Volume 3?
No.
Will it be 2025?
Probably not. Hopefully 2026. Hopefully early 2026.
Perfect. If for those of you that want to be on the know, do you have a newsletter or any way that they will know when Volume 3 is getting ready to come out?
Yeah, you can subscribe to our newsletter on our website. I also, if you're on social media, we're on basically all the big social media platforms, pretty much exclusively at the handle @mash, the letter N as in Nancy, grain. And I would follow those social platforms because that's where a lot of our big announcements are going to go. But yeah, sign up for the newsletter on mashandgrain.com.
For those new to craft whiskey, what advice would you give to somebody who's just starting their whiskey and bourbon journey to appreciate and explore the diversity within this category a little more?
It's a good question. I mean, I think I would be a bad promoter of my business if I didn't say go to mashandgrain.com and read the articles that we've written about dozens of incredible producers from around the country. I think that, you know, part of the reason why our slogan is whiskey is about stories, we want to tell them, is because, you know, there is something towards blind tasting, and certainly in a competition, you know, framework, blind tasting makes sense. But in general, Chase and I believe that consumers, they want to know more about what they're drinking. They want to know where it came from. A lot of people want to know how it's made. And in some ways, knowing that history and knowing that story can make the experience of drinking whiskey, especially something that has to go into a barrel and age for years. The product that you're bringing to your lips is something that in some cases has been decades in the making. That can help add to the experience of enjoying that whiskey or tasting that whiskey. So go to the website, read our articles. I don't think you're going to find anywhere else on the internet more information about these places. I always like to say, the goal for the website from the very beginning was kind of to become the place to go if you want to learn about a craft whiskey distillery. Maybe outside of their own website, we want to be the place that's going to have all the information. Outside of that, look for craft distilleries in your home state, maybe even in your neighborhood. God knows that Jim Beam and Buffalo Trace and Woodford, they're going to be fine no matter what the economy is doing, but your local craft distiller might not be. So if you can spend your time and maybe some of your money, and I know that that's really valuable, especially right now, if you can spend that at a local small business, especially a small whiskey distillery, go there, take a tour, talk with the bartenders, talk with the owners if they're there, get to know them, get to know what whiskeys they make that you like, maybe what whiskeys they make that you don't like, but take some time to support local. I think that's probably the most important thing, especially in this time right now.
Tell me a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey. Starting your own whiskey blending company combined with a blog that tells these intimate and personal stories about these distilleries. Was it easy to get started? Was it very labor intensive? Was it a lot of capital involved? Has it been just an easy path the whole way?
No. I'll say I think that the way that we've grown has felt very natural. When the company started, we were a website, we were a blog. Infrastructure, zero. Capital, zero. And in many ways it was, we started this company in the summer of 2020. We had a pandemic going on. Nobody could leave their houses. In many ways, it was just a nice way to connect with my best friend, who at the time was living in New Orleans. I was living in Brooklyn, New York. Connect with really impressive entrepreneurs and distillers from around the country. Start making a lot of really wonderful friends. The thing that we learned or experienced really early on when we started the company is that the craft spirit space is a really wonderful community. It's a very supportive community. We learned how hard it is to open a distillery, especially given the sort of David versus Goliath situation that many of these people were getting themselves into. But it's incredibly supportive. There's that term, right? A rising tide floats all ships, and that rings true among the people that we've gotten to know over the last 5 years. So when we started, it was pretty easy. I was at home. I was a stay-at-home dad because I lost my job from the pandemic. That was wonderful, and occasionally, every couple weeks, I got to hop on a Zoom with my best friend, and people would send me whiskey for free, and I could sit on a Zoom and drink whiskey and talk with them and write these articles. I think that things with the website took a dramatic improvement when we brought on Megan Swanson, who is our head writer at American Mash and Grain, and she started writing the articles. I think I'm a pretty good writer, but she is an incredible writer, so she really helped to shape the voice of American Mash and Grain, which I think was kind of our first evolution. And again, that was relatively seamless. Becoming an independent bottler and producing our own whiskeys was not necessarily a part of the plan at the beginning. But as Chase and I got more into this, about a year or so in, the idea of being able to create a product of our own and put it out there became very appealing. The problem is that it is a very highly regulated space, and for good reason, but they don't just let anybody put whiskey into a bottle and sell it to somebody. So we had a lot of learning that we had to do, and we were lucky that we had a lot of people who were willing to help. I mentioned Greg Lehman before from Watershed. He hopped on a Zoom with us early on, along with Ann Demick, who at the time was working at Watershed. She now works with Ohio Liquors, and she was the guest blender for Volume 1. They hopped on a Zoom, and for free, even though they do consult as a business, they sort of walked us through what we needed to do, what kind of licenses we needed to apply for, who we needed to talk to, the kind of hard goods that we needed to think about, glass bottles, closures, shrink wrap, labels. All of this really came about out of the kindness of the connections and relationships that we had built through the website. So while it was an intensive learning experience, financially, it wasn't too much of a burden, and that really gave us space through friends and family to raise a very modest amount of money, enough to get Volume 1 out the door. And the idea was that money from Volume 1 would pay for Volume 2, and so on and so forth. Now that model hasn't necessarily worked out, as we learned, nor has the model of, originally we were exclusively being sold online through our store, which during the beginning of the pandemic was great. But as the pandemic started to slow and places started to open, the online space wasn't generating the sales at the rate that we needed to continue. And we're still dealing with some of those financial issues of growing and expanding, which is why Volume 3 is not out the door quite yet. But Volume 1 just sold out a couple months ago, which is wonderful and sort of bittersweet because it was our first baby. Volume 2 is about 3/4 of the way there. So we're really hopeful that we can kind of get on top of this, the financial turnaround, so that we can get to a point where we can release these more often. But yeah, it's all been a work in progress, learning as we go, flying by the seat of our pants kind of a thing. But it's been a wonderful journey so far.
So you, Devin, are the owner and founder of American Mash and Grain, a fantastic whiskey blender and storyteller. I mean, has it just been immediate success where you sit in your Maserati and vacation nonstop? Has there been any big hurdles, or what's been the biggest, I guess, unknown that you've encountered, and how did you get over it, and what did you learn?
Yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of time reflecting on our success in my 2010 used Subaru Forester. Not quite, the Maserati's on layaway. I think I'll get it at some point. No, I think that I'm really proud of what we do at American Mash and Grain, but at the same time, I recognize that the kind of whiskeys that we're making are purposefully different from what else is out there. And because they're different, it's going to take a little bit of time and education to get the consumer on board with what makes what we're doing so special. I think we're starting to see that, especially once we got into retail locations here in Colorado. We got distribution here in Colorado, and Chase and I have had opportunities to go out and do in-store tastings and tastings out there with people. The biggest thing, right, is telling the story and getting whiskey to lips. That's the biggest struggle, the biggest hurdle to overcome. And we've certainly made great strides in the last year or so since we've gotten distribution here in Colorado. We've got a lot of exciting plans to expand the company, to increase our marketing outreach, and to continue that education standpoint to get people to understand what we're doing and what differentiates us from every other bottle out there at the liquor store. But no, I think the success for me so far isn't weighed in dollars and cents. I have not made a penny from American Mash and Grain. I do not anticipate that I will be making a penny from American Mash and Grain in the near future. We do it because we believe in the producers that we work with. We do it because I see a future for American whiskey that I don't believe has come to fruition yet. And we want to be a part of writing that next chapter. And I think the success for me is weighed in the fact that Watershed Distillery, Virginia Distillery Company, Mammoth Distilling, Talnua, Spirits of French Lick, Wiggle, Whiskey Del Bach, with very little evidence that we knew what we were doing. They trusted us with their whiskey, and not just trusted us with their whiskey to put it in a bottle with their name on it and nothing else. Like, we get compared a lot to Lost Lantern, and we're very good friends with Adam and Nora. They've become, they're incredibly supportive of us. They've become a sounding board for us in many ways. And in some ways, they are doing some things that are really similar to us. They're working exclusively with small craft producers. They're dealing exclusively in whiskey. But much of what they've done is single barrels. They buy barrels from these distilleries, they put it into glass, beautiful bottles, beautiful whiskeys. They have incredible palates. If you haven't ever tasted a Lost Lantern product after you buy a Borrowed Page, you should probably go and do that after you buy Borrowed Page. But they are incredible. And at this point, they've developed a reputation where it's easy to trust what they're doing. But we're not just putting somebody's whiskey into a bottle with their logo on it and their name on it. They're trusting us to blend their whiskey with somebody else's whiskey who they have no connection with whatsoever. So I think the success that we've experienced so far is in creating two whiskeys that I think are remarkable. I think that they are very different than anything else you're going to find, and that these distilleries trust us with their very valuable product that they spent years making, to allow for us to blend their stuff with somebody else's stuff and put their name on it and put their logo on it, and sell it and put it out there for people to drink. I think that's where the success lies for me so far, is in the community that we've been able to establish through the company.
So being a master blender of American mash and grain, how exactly did you go about learning how to blend whiskeys?
First and foremost, I reject the term master blender. I don't think I've earned that at this point, and I don't know if I'll ever feel comfortable with that term. Maybe one day. To be honest with you, I have learned to blend through doing this. I would love to say that I was at home tinkering with bottles I had on my shelf and marrying multiple things together and knew that I was going to be good at this, but that's just not true. The truth of it is that I have spent the last 7 years really training my nose and really training my palate. The certifications that I have gone through have obviously helped, but I've done a lot of work just improving my sensory analysis at home. Writing the reviews for the articles that we write on Mash and Grain has been a big part of that. But I tell people, Chase and I had never blended apple juice together before we started working on Borrowed Page Volume 1. Again, it truly boggles my mind that anybody trusted us to do it. And I think for that reason, initially at least, we came up with the concept with Borrowed Page that we were going to, for every release, bring in a new guest blender. So as I mentioned before, Ann Dimick, who at the time was working for Watershed, now she works for Ohio Liquor. Before she worked at Watershed, she worked for Wild Turkey under Campari. She was our guest blender for Volume 1. And we picked her brain like crazy. And she gave us a ton of tips and tricks while we were creating that first blend. So a lot of my process now comes from working on Volume 1 and working with Ann Dimick. And Ann has worked with incredible people in this industry, so I trust her wholeheartedly. And I think it shows in Volume 1. I think it's a masterpiece whiskey. I won't call myself a master blender by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that the juice in Volume 1 and Volume 2 is exceptional. For Volume 2, our guest blender was an influencer. His name is Ryan Mills. Most people are more familiar with him under his handle, That One Dude Ryan. He's very well known for his slam and sips style of whiskey tasting on Instagram and TikTok. He had done some work. I think he had done some work with Penelope, helping them with some of their blends. He had done some work with Sagamore spirits, so he had a little bit of experience under his belt. But I would say he was coming into Volume 2 in a more similar place where Chase and I were coming in after Volume 1. But that was really fun. And the idea around guest blending is maybe twofold, and maybe eventually one of them will sort of disappear as Chase and I are becoming more comfortable as blenders in our own right. The first was obviously to learn from them. The other aspect of it is to expose borrowed page whiskeys to new palates, and not have it just be based on what Chase and I are tasting, but what somebody from the industry is tasting, or somebody else industry adjacent is tasting. In the similar way that we want to expose people to distilleries around the country, we want to expose them to the palates of the guest blenders that we bring in as well. The consistency is always going to be there with me and Chase, but the guest blenders just bring a new layer to our method, to our expressions. The truth is that I'm still learning how to blend, but I'm incredibly proud of what we've been able to do so far, and I think they're only going to get better from here on out.
So to apply to be a guest blender, do we have to go on your Instagram and share your handle and then buy a bottle of borrowed page?
Buying a bottle of borrowed page never hurts. I will happily accept bribes. No, I think, the guest blender is a little bit more vague and innocuous than how we go about choosing the whiskeys and the distillers that we're going to work with. I think we want somebody with an interesting perspective and somebody with an interesting story to tell in their own right, and was a teacher for us. Ryan is a megaphone, in many ways. Whoever's going to be the guest blender for Volume 3, it's not going to be based on followers or reputation or resume, but somebody that we think has an interesting story to add to the release, and somebody that I think is going to challenge us as blenders to create something that otherwise we wouldn't be able to create without them.
So you talk about over the years enhancing your palate and learning how to, enhance your sensory profile. For those of us that are just getting into learning how to properly taste whiskeys, is there anything that we can do to, more enjoy the spirits? Is there foods that you avoid? Is there water droplets you put in, a cube of ice? What can you do to, better enjoy the experience of a unique whiskey?
Yeah, I would say to start, just drink as many different kinds of whiskey as you can. From there you can decide to get as nerdy and meticulous about it as you want. I certainly have a different approach when I'm tasting a whiskey on a casual basis, when I'm tasting a whiskey to write a review, and when I'm tasting a whiskey to consider it for a blend. They're very different inputs, that I'm looking for, and therefore I prepare myself and my body and my palate in different ways for them. But I say if you're early on and you're getting started, the best thing you can do is have a glass of whiskey every night. It doesn't have to be a big pour. I think there was a book I read by Lou Bryson about tasting whiskey, and he talks about this concept of sort of breaking through the wall, right? It's very similar to the idea of adjusting to eating spicy food, right? Capsaicin in peppers is not that different on a molecular level as the ethanol in whiskey. They both create a barrier for a lot of people that our brain interprets as heat, right? So to get to a point where you can start to enjoy whiskey, you need to break through the wall, as Bryson would say. And the best way to do that is pour yourself a half of an ounce of whiskey every night. We're not talking about getting hammered or drunk. I understand that we're talking about alcohol, and there are, certain concerns around that, but have a little glass of whiskey every night. Read about or try to learn about how to properly taste whiskey, because the one thing that I see a lot of people do is they kind of slam it back, or they drink whiskey relatively quickly, right? When we're young, taking shots, that's how we drink hard liquor. When we get older, maybe we have a connotation, maybe a memory from drinking those shots, that whiskey is a little rough and tumble, a little rough around the edges. Better to just kind of get it over with quickly and, you know, slam it down. The issue with that a lot of people don't know is your tongue is split up into different sectors. Most of your bitter taste buds are in the back of your mouth, right? So if you drink whiskey quickly, if you slam it back, only your bitter taste buds are getting a chance to taste it. You're also giving your body no time at all to proof that alcohol down. So whatever the proof of that alcohol is, it's gonna hit you in the back of the throat and it's gonna burn the hell out of you. So I recommend taking a small sip to start, let it sort of coat your palate, swallow. That's just sort of a greeting. Getting your body and your brain ready to understand that we're about to drink some high proof stuff. Chances are, if it's your first taste of alcohol of the day, most of what you're gonna taste is alcohol. Don't worry about that first sip. It's just the hello. Second sip, again, take a small amount. Hold that on the front of your tongue. That's where all of your sweeter taste buds are. Again, kind of let it wash over your whole palate, your tongue, the sides of your tongue, the roof of your mouth. Don't swish it. It's not mouthwash. That shouldn't need to be said. Let it coat your mouth. And then when you swallow, exhale. I was talking with somebody today who was sort of relaying that same message they had heard from somebody else. Your mouth is a very hot environment. When the whiskey goes in there, it's going to start to evaporate because it's in that hot environment. By exhaling, you release those evaporated alcohol vapors outside of your body, right? Rather than letting them get stuck. If you've ever had that sort of immediate heartburn feeling after drinking some whiskey or other spirits, that's evaporated alcohol gas in your esophageal tract. You want to get that out. So after you swallow, exhale gently. Not only is it going to release those vapors, but you're going to bring air over all of the oils that were in that whiskey that are on your palate, on the roof of your mouth. That air is going to sort of bring those flavors in those oils to life. Practice that style of drinking whiskey. Have a little bit of whiskey every night. Try different styles. And eventually, you'll find that you break through that wall. You don't really focus on the heat from the alcohol anymore. And you're able to access a much deeper and richer layer of aromas and flavors that you would have never known were in there before. We are a whiskey media company that has a website that features a new craft whiskey producer from around the country every month. We write really in-depth articles that deep dive into the who, how, why, and where behind some of the country's most interesting craft producers. We are also an independent bottler, releasing unique and distinctive American blended whiskeys called Borrowed Page, which are one-of-a-kind American blended whiskeys that look to sort of change the conversation around what American whiskey is and can be. We hope you enjoy them.